In 1919, I fled a country that had been traded in despotism for insanity.
Russia in the 1910s was a hot mess. It was ruled by Tsar Nicholas II, whose reign was defined by military failure, increased poverty, anti-Semitic pogroms, Rasputin, and continued misery among the Russian people. Russia entered the First World War in 1914, unprepared, ill-equipped, and with little support from the Russian populace. This discontentment of the Russian people would grow into full-on revolution in 1917, when Tsar Nicholas II was removed from power in the February Revolution. A weak democratic provisional government replaced him, but didn't last long. In October, it was overthrown by Marxist Vladimir Lenin and the Bolsheviks, sparking the Russian Civil War, which the Bolsheviks eventually won.
The Marxist revolution simply traded one lie for another. Instead of one man, the Tsar, owning the work of all the people own the work of all of the people.
In a village outside of Minsk, a Jewish boy named Andrei Ryanovsky and his family experienced the Bolsheviks' rise to power. Their family business was destroyed, and Andrei's father, Pyotr, who had spoken out against the Bolsheviks, was targeted by the Red Guard. After hearing from a priest that anti-communist purges were to begin the next day, Andrei and Pyotr fled Russia via train in 1919. While waiting for the train, Andrei witnessed his father's cousins Dmitry and Vasilia executed by the Red Guard for speaking out against the Bolsheviks the previous night. This memory would stay with him forever. Andrei and Pyotr would go to Constantinople. They would then flee further to America. Andrei Ryanovsky would later Americanize his name to Andrew Ryan.
And so, I came to America.
Andrew Ryan had great success in America. He struck oil and then invested the profits wisely, becoming one of the richest people in the world. By the time he was an adult, Andrew Ryan owned a large amount of America's coal, its second biggest railroad, and an oil company named Ryan Oil. Fleeing from Russia and having great success in the more individualistic America led to Ryan having an extremely individualistic ideology. He believed that America was the perfect country for someone like him in his worldview. As he lived there, however, more issues came up that were against his personal belief system.
Presidency, I will address them with a candor and a decision which the present situation of our people impels. So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
He despised the FDR administration, seeing him as spoon-feeding socialism to the American public.
The Americans drank deeper and deeper of the Bolshevik poison, spoon-fed to them by Roosevelt and his New Dealers.
There was an attempt by Congress to nationalize a forest he owned, with the justification being that the land belonged to God.
On the surface, I once bought a forest. The parasites claimed that the land belonged to God and demanded that I establish a public park there. When Congress moved to nationalize my forest, I burnt it to the ground. God did not plant the seeds of this Arcadia. I did.
He also had issues with selective service and taxes, the latter of which his father was arrested for not paying. The final straw would come with the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, an act he saw as the ultimate show of government force and misused power, while also fearing it would cause an atomic war destroying the world.
And so, I asked myself, in what country was there a place for men like me?
Ryan would greenlight the construction of Rapture, a city based on his worldview, objectivism.
Is a man not entitled to the sweat of his brow?
So what is objectivism? Objectivism is a mid-20th century philosophy founded by Ayn Rand.
His highest moral purpose is the achievement of his own happiness, and that he must not force other people, nor accept their right to force him, that each man must live as an end in himself and follow his own rational self-interest.
Objectivism says that selfishness is a virtue and one should only live for oneself. No one should sacrifice one's happiness for another person. It believes in a laissez-faire capitalist economy. Everyone should work their own way up selfishly without expecting handouts from the government, nor have their work forcibly taken by others. No one answers to any higher power, only themselves. Or as Andrew Ryan puts it, no gods or kings, only man. There are other tenets to objectivism.
The newest proposals of having special millions spent on subnormal children and on the handicapped, including those so-called kneeling buses, is the attempt to bring everybody to the level of the handicapped.
However, this is not a video about objectivism. A better video for that is Monty Xander's After the Shrug, as he goes into more in depth about how Bioshock represents objectivism.
If you're not familiar with objectivism, don't worry, this video is definitely for you. And if you're a fan of Ayn Rand...
Many of you might disagree or be confused on how someone could believe in this set of ideals, let alone build a city based on them. However, knowing Andrew Ryan's past makes it extremely obvious. Fleeing from the Bolsheviks and having members of his family killed by them would put anyone in a negative disposition towards a more state-controlled society. Becoming successful in a more individualistic country through, as he sees it, the sweat of his brow, would only reinforce his positive views on laissez-faire economics. That's economics though. The idea that selfishness is a virtue and that altruism is evil is a big pill for a lot of people to swallow.
I say that man is entitled to his own happiness and that he must achieve it himself, but that he cannot demand that others give up their lives to make him happy.
Thankfully, Andrew Ryan wrote a speech about it. While it is definitely a propaganda speech, it is extremely clear Ryan believes what he is saying. He describes altruism, the unselfish regard or devotion to the welfare of others, as worse than dictatorship, slavery, and the Holocaust.
What is the greatest lie ever created? What is the most vicious obscenity ever perpetrated on mankind? Slavery, the Holocaust, dictatorship. No, it's the tool with which all that wickedness is built, altruism.
This is an insane statement to make. However, he gives his reasons, and knowing what he went through, it makes sense why he would believe this.
Whenever anyone wants others to do their work, they call upon their altruism. Never mind your own needs, they say. Think of the needs of whoever. Of the state, of the poor, of the army, of the king, of God. The list goes on and on. How many catastrophes were launched with the words, think of yourself?
Think of yourself. That sums up the foundation that Rapture was built upon.
I chose the impossible. I chose Rapture. A city where the artist would not fear the censor, where the scientist would not be bound by petty morality, where the great would not be constrained by the small. And with the sweat of your brow, Rapture can become your city as well.
This attracted like-minded individuals to the city who wanted a society with no government intervention. While some weren't full believers or were believers but had some wiggle room, Ryan was an absolutist and would stick with his ideology even through situations that he personally didn't like. When asked to interfere with Fontaine Futuristics when it gained a near monopoly on the plasmids business, he refused.
Gregory, don't come whining to me about market forces, and don't expect me to punish citizens for showing a little initiative. If you don't like what Fontaine is doing, well, I suggest you find a way to offer a better product.
He saw the collectivist art in Dionysus Park as terrible, but he refused to censor it.
Lamb mocks me in the naming of this place. She knows precisely how I feel about this celebration of unconscious art. The artist reflects the world as it ought to be, not as it is damned to be by some spasm of the lower mind. I shall not censor. The park is Lamb's property.
Even as people were getting addicted and dying from plasmids, he refused to apply any regulations.
There has been tremendous pressure to regulate this plasmid business. There have been side effects, blindness, insanity, death. But what use is our ideology if it is not tested? Is there blood on the streets? Of course. Have some chosen to destroy themselves with careless splicing? Undeniable. But I will make no proclamations. I will dictate no laws. The market does not respond like an infant, shrieking at the first sign of displeasure. The market is patient, and we must be too.
All of these solutions would have required state intervention, which completely went against his ideology. Like many extremists, he would demonize anyone who actively went against his philosophy, labeling them as parasites.
What is the difference between a man and a parasite. The parasite of big government. Parasite expects the doctor to heal them for free. Parasites we fled from. The parasites are like all parasites, Parasite. Parasites will never understand how little they differ from the pervert who prowls the streets looking for a victim he can ravish for his grotesque amusement.
However, there was one thing that would result in him breaking nearly all of his strongly held beliefs. Ryan finally had his utopia where he felt he could be free from the parasites from the surface. His biggest fear was that his city would be taken away from him. There were some actions which would display his paranoia early on. He had a prison called Persephone Penal Colony built for people he considered threats to Rapture. When a random deep-sea diver accidentally found Rapture, Ryan didn't see an explorer, he saw a spy. He was thrown into Persephone and turned into a Big Daddy. When Dr. Sophia Lamb's collectivist ideas were gaining popularity, she was thrown in as well. These situations, however, were nothing compared to the biggest line he crossed.
This Fontaine fellow is somebody to watch. Once he was just a menace, to be convicted and hung. But he always manages to be where the evidence isn't. He's the most dangerous type of hoodlum. A kind with vision.
To discuss that, it is important to discuss Frank Fontaine. Frank Fontaine grew his wealth out of smuggling in contraband from the surface. Using these ill-gotten gains, he created Fontaine Futuristics and, as said previously, created a near monopoly on the plasmid and atom business. Fontaine set up housing for the poor and orphanages. Ryan saw this as spreading that evil of altruism, which is ironic since Fontaine did not set up the poorhouses out of charity, but as a way to gain more support of the city's underclass, similar to how Al Capone set up soup kitchens in the 1930s.
I hand these mugs a cart and a bowl of soup, and they give me their lives. Who needs an army when I got Fontaine's Home for the Poor?
All of this could be overlooked. Ryan's main issue with Fontaine came from the continued risks he posed to the city of Rapture with his smuggling operation.
Any contact with the surface exposes Rapture to the very parasites we fled from.
Going even further of adding capital punishment for smugglers who brought in contraband from the surface.
The death penalty and Rapture. Council's in an uproar. But this is the time for leadership. Action must be taken against the smugglers. A few stretched necks or a small price to pay for our deals.
It became personal when Fontaine purchased Ryan's fertilized egg from stripper Jasmine Jolene.
I'm sorry, Mr. Ryan. I didn't know. I didn't know Fontaine had something to do with it. What are you doing? No, don't, please. I loved you, don't, please, no!
Ryan didn't take it well. It was time for him to go after Fontaine. Fontaine carefully made sure no evidence could lead back to him, but eventually his illegal activity would catch up to him. Ryan sent Rapture security to arrest Fontaine, which would result in a shootout in which Fontaine was killed.
Instead of copping it on the chin, Bugger gets it into his head that he's gonna go down guns blazing. Who does he think he is, John bloody Wayne?
While Fontaine may have been in the ground, Fontaine Futuristics wasn't. Some of Ryan's closest people, including Chief Engineer Bill McDonough, advised Ryan to not touch Fontaine's assets.
We can get on top of this. We can. Here's what we do. We find Fontaine's will and make what was his go to where it was intended, and not into the pockets of us that put him into the ground.
However, there was a possibility that if Ryan let Fontaine Futuristics go, the smuggling operation could continue without Fontaine, putting the city more in danger. For Ryan, it was a battle between his principles or his paranoia, and paranoia won.
Ryan nationalised Fontaine Futuristics. He owns it now, lock, stock and barrel. For the good of the city, he says.
This action would be the beginning of the end of Rapture.
Fontaine is gone. Lamb is gone. Or close enough. I am alone at last. Alone with my city.
All of Ryan's enemies were either dead or locked up. He could return to building his objectivist utopia. However, like all attempts at utopia, it never goes according to plan. A byproduct of a city with no social safety nets or regulations is an extreme class divide. Ryan offered no help to the lower class. That went completely against his principles. A desperate lower class being screwed over by a system that encourages the upper class not to care about those below is the perfect recipe for a man like Atlas. Atlas was an Irish revolutionary who saw how Ryan's utopia affected the lower classes. He used the now abandoned Fontaine poorhouses to recruit disillusioned citizens to participate in an uprising against Ryan. While Fontaine was liked by the lower classes but still seen as a criminal, Atlas was a fellow worker, which made him far more sympathetic. This created a problem for Ryan, as unlike Fontaine, Atlas couldn't be killed without sparking further retribution from the populace. This would all culminate on New Year's Eve in 1958 at the Kashmir restaurant.
Message from Ryan Industries. There has been an incident at the Kashmir restaurant. Please return to the safety of your homes until further notice. Thank you.
Rapture was now in civil war. Ryan's paranoia increased exponentially. He implemented a curfew and laws against public congregations. Ryan enacted martial law in Apollo Square, turning it effectively into a concentration camp. These actions did not go unnoticed by the more upper-class members of Rapture. Some people would defect to Atlas's side, and multiple assassination attempts against him would occur. These actions would only seemingly verify his paranoid fears, increasing them.
It's a regular convention of worms in here. They all had mothers, fathers, people who loved them. They got married, fucked their wives.
The most major line he crossed, however, was when he approved of pheromones being added to plasmids to make its users more susceptible to mental suggestions, completely removing them of free will and making them his slaves.
If we were to modify the structure of our commercial plasmid line as you propose, to have them make the user vulnerable to mental suggestion through pheromones, would we not be able to effectively control the actions of the citizens of Rapture?
He had personal justifications for all these actions.
Free will is the cornerstone of this city. The thought of sacrificing it is abhorrent. However, we are indeed in a time of war. If Atlas and his bandits have their way, will they not turn us into slaves? And what will become of free will then?
But that didn't change the fact he'd broken the ideals he claimed to uphold. By the time the events of the first Bioshock occur, Ryan is fully consumed by paranoia.
So tell me, friend, which one of the bitches said to you, the KGB Wolf or the CIA Jack?
Ryan doesn't even attempt to figure out who Jack is until the end of the Neptune's bounty level.
You ooze in like an assassin, and then you try to sneak out like a thief. You're no CIA spook. Who are you? Why have you come here?
Then he is willing to destroy the city rather than see his utopia fall into the wrong hands. At one point, attempting to poison Arcadia, destroying the oxygen supply, and then later on activating Rapture's self-destruct sequence.
A season for all things. A time to live and a time to die. A time to build and a time to destroy!
Ultimately, choosing to go down with his sunken paradise. Andrew Ryan was traumatized by collectivism and empowered by individualism. In creating Rapture, he created a world where he felt he would be safe from the surface, and the fear of losing that city would ultimately override any moral or ideological compass he once had. Ironically, Andrew Ryan became what he always hated: a parasite. Thank you for watching. This took way too long to make, but I'm happy with the results, so I'm glad you could see it. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.